Thanks everyone for coming back after the break to join us. It's always good to come back to a crowd rather than a very thin room, so I appreciate that, and I'm sure all of our panellists will also. This afternoon's session we're going to be doing a panel discussion, and that panel discussion is going to be on how we weave our digital strategy into modern business foundations. So RPMGlobal is where I'm from, and we've been major sponsors of the future of mining for the last couple of years. And digital strategy is really very close to our hearts. So we've been on our own digital journey for the last, well, I'll call it several years. And I'll call it a journey too, because it's not something you just wake up one day and say, hey, we're going digital, and it just happens. So you really do have to plan this journey out. You have to understand where you as a company want to go, and you have to understand how that digital strategy ties into the rest of the plan of your company itself. So today we've got a very experienced and very competent group of panellists who are going to come and join me up here. We've got Mathew Allan. Mathew Allan is our senior project engineer who works for Resolute Mining on the Syama Underground project. I won't go through all of his qualifications, but he adds an enormous amount of value, in particular what they're doing with the autonomous project that they're putting together up in Mali there. So he'll certainly add a lot to that. I've got Richard Macoun, who's the Program Director for Mine to Metals for AMIRA International. Richard has technical qualifications in chemistry, Bachelor of Science honours from the University of Sydney, and a number of other qualifications and degrees as well. Richard's worked for BHP and again has an enormous amount of experience to add to this particular topic. And finally, we've got John Wylie from Proudfoot. John's the president of the Natural Resources Division, and he provides great perspectives in that John is providing a lot of experience from outside of the mining industry as well. So thank you very much, John. When we talk about digital strategy, it tends to generate a lot of interest. And I think one of the reasons that it generates so much interest is the simple fact that digital means so much to so many different people, or something different to everyone. If I was to go around the room and you know, pick a few people out and ask what digital meant to you, I'm sure we'd have a very wide and varied group of answers. So I'd like to kick off the discussion today with a fairly simple question, but straight to the point, is what does digital mean to you guys up here on the panel itself?
Anyone you want to start with? You'll start with me, right. Okay, from my perspective, it's about being able to link things together, to be able to exchange data, and then be able to use that data. It's, you know, in the old days it was all analog on pieces of paper. Now it's electronic, and it should happen seamlessly. That's the goal, is that to actually, a lot of that subjective nature can come out of digital, and it can actually speed things up, make it much more efficient.
So I think, Richard, absolutely there's a lot to that. I think there's the other perspective that we're seeing around digital is that it's sort of becoming a catchphrase.
Yes.
For an awful lot of things, and it is that connectivity part, but it's also the intimacy of data or the detail of data. So digital is giving you the idea that potentially you're going to see data on a much more micro scale.
Increase the resolution, yeah.
That's right. And then as well, the connectivity, so more people are going to be able to share the same data. And then and there is a logic leap that says, if we have everybody sharing the same data at a very detailed level, then we'll have much faster decisions and much more alignment. So I think that digital sort of like picks up that entire space. So it has both the operating side of things, and then as well some of the management side of things.
I think I agree. In my mind, I think of digital and digitalization as just getting the information from some sort of analog form to a digital form. And there's still a lot of operations that are using pen and paper. And digitalization is removing that from your business process. And then the next question is, how does that improve, or how do you use that information once it's in a digital format? And it's really just jumping on the train of exponential computing power and exponential data growth that we're seeing, and leveraging that to underpin your business.
Okay. I might just join the guys over here. It's going to be a long time standing up there otherwise. But what do you see as the benefits of going down this digital path, and why would yourselves as a company or as individuals, why would you be investing in the digital, we'll call it the digital revolution, but what are the major benefits that you expect to get from it?
I think it's in large part about efficiency. I mean, I know it is a very topical topic, if you want to call it that. But I think we've gone beyond the stage now where you can get a competitive advantage by being involved in digital. I think, if anything, it's the reverse, or the mirror image. If you are not involved in digital, you will be at a disadvantage. So you need to be involved. It's something that you're going to need to do just to maintain the status quo, or maintain your competitive position. I think it's probably a better way of putting it.
And is that true for every company, or are we talking mining companies?
I'm talking mining. Well, no, I think it is actually everywhere.
Yeah.
It is everywhere.
Yeah.
And mining companies are playing catch up now.
And I think that the main benefit is you really compress the planning time frame and your ability to react. Now that you can get real-time information, you can make real-time decisions, and that provides you with a way to get efficiency, to get productivity. And it's that compression of the planning process to a real-time environment is the real benefit of digitalization, and then after that, automation.
Okay.
So digitalization in mining has the unique opportunity to learn from other people that were the precursors. So one of the things that you see, if you look at digitalization across manufacturing and, to a certain extent, financial services, some of the companies really got stuck in analyzing the data, which became a different path on the road. They spent a lot of time doing that. It didn't really get them anything. And it was done in a relatively small area. What you're starting to see now in terms of manufacturing is not only just the planning side of things and utilization of resources, but you're also starting to see a change in how we manage. And so it's changing the conversations. And it's allowing people to align across why are we doing these things and why is it important, and how are we going to create more value together. So I think that the digitalization has all of the information side, but it also has a huge opportunity on the management side.
Mm-hmm.
And reducing bias perhaps as well.
Absolutely.
In that the discussion isn't so much about politics in a boardroom, but it comes down to data-driven decisions. And people, I guess, that understand the pitfalls of data. It's not always correct, and you've got to understand how it's created. But making decisions that is looking at the value for the business, understanding what the value function for a business is, and then how do we maximize that. I think that process is one that is just evolving. I don't think it's quite there yet.
Okay.
Yeah, so the real positive is speed. The speed of decisions. Once you get away from the data bias side, people are going to be making decisions a lot faster.
Okay. Well, that lends itself quite well to the next question is how does your digital strategy work in tandem with a wider business strategy?
Richard, we're going left to right here.
We're going left to right. Okay. Well, I think you actually need to have a digital strategy on several levels. One is for your operational business, and actually, which is a lot of what we've been talking about now, and actually getting that into how you, as I said before, just to maintain your competitive position. But where we haven't seen too much work yet is moving it into speeding up the decisions on projects, right? I mean, a lot of the reason we get this cyclic nature in the mining industries is that projects take so long to start and so long, there's huge barriers to entry and exit in mining. If we can actually use digitalisation to actually compress that, that will actually give a lot of value. By actually expanding the digital strategy to more than your operations, but also your enterprise.
Yeah, I think that covers, I mean, there's an awful lot there.
Yes.
You're going to have a lot of risk mitigation opportunities, and you're going to have the ability to safely compress schedules. Really what you see is by having egalitarian information, everybody having access to it, you create alignment and a commonality of, okay, this is how we're working together. So the benefit of that is, multifold.
Yeah. I think also the digital strategy isn't something that operates in tandem. I really think that it just becomes core business, and it becomes the way that you do business. So instead of having a digital strategy that is distinct from your mining strategy or your mine design or anything like that, it really just becomes part of the way you work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has to these days.
And that's what I think very much you want to not necessarily look at creating a new model, but you want to look at how do I take my model and make it more effective.
Okay. We might start up the other end now.
Okay.
Swap back from right to left and go to left to right. So having a few discussions with Mathew earlier on, he's doing some really, really interesting stuff in the autonomous projects that they're using at the Syama Underground out in Mali. And so how do you take that strategy and operationalize it?
I guess without banging the drum too hard, I think I'm quite lucky to work at Resolute because the strategy of automation and digitalization is supported throughout the business. So it's not really an intense discussion about what the plan is. We know that there's value associated with this, and we're seeing quick wins coming out of some of the automation that we're doing already. So I think as an example, the automated drilling that we've got at the moment is we're sort of getting 20 to 30% extra drill meters per day from the automated drills. And so once you have those quick wins, everybody starts getting on board. There's always people within the business and that don't always agree with the strategy, but I think that as you start seeing these quick wins, as you start seeing that digitalization adds value to the business, everybody starts jumping on board, and so it actually is sort of like a domino effect that even though it can be hard to start implementing something like automation, I think a lot of people have some hesitation around that it's stealing jobs or something like that, or it's largely a misconception. But once they start seeing the value associated and their role in it, it starts to domino effect, and you actually gain the support of everybody as you go.
Okay. And John, do you see the same sort of thing with digital strategies and so on in industries outside of mining?
I think there's a lot of learning that industry has gone through. And so you're now starting to see digital solutions not just sit in the information technology side. It's now much more in the operational space. And typically organizations are going into digitalization with a certain outcome in mind. So what the learning that we're seeing is that organizations are understanding that you need to communicate not just what the process is, but what the outcomes are that we're looking for. We did a large piece of work with a major international airline in Asia that was digitalizing their maintenance side of things. For them, the outcome that they were looking for was that they would be able to shorten the overall amount of time that the aircraft was sitting on the ground, the C check and which is basically the rebuild. And they were going to do that by compressing the amount of time that it took to get parts into certain areas, and as well the inspection and sign-off process. They put 2 years into getting the software and the hardware and training everybody. And then when they went to do it, people were very resistant because they hadn't necessarily explained, as Mathew was talking about, how is this going to impact my job? How is this going to impact my role? Am I still a supervisor if I'm no longer handing out work tickets? If people have a PDA and they can pull up the piece of work that they want to do, does that mean that they're not supervised? So I think that there's a learning that is saying, if you're going to digitalize for an outcome, you have to start getting people to buy in on that. That's actually the hard part. That's the part that took the longest amount of time for them.
Okay.
I was going to say that a lot of this is about change management. The digital part is relatively easy. It's the change management. Where I've seen it work relatively efficiently is where there is clear leadership from the top. And I used to work for BASF, and the CEO basically said every division will have a digitalisation strategy or digitalisation project. Now, not all of them are going to be successful, but when you have it happening everywhere, you will get enough successes and then you can start sharing them. So I think, as Mathew was saying before, it's about making it part of what we do every day, making it part of the regular business. And sometimes, especially with large corporations that have a lot of inertia, you do need to just have something from the top going, make it happen, guys. That's the way to sort of... And it will depend on your organisation. Smaller organisations are often more flexible and everyone's already caught up in the buzz. But other organisations, people have a lot invested in their current structure, and there isn't a change. So you do need to actually just go back and think about the regular change management process. How do you actually get this through?
Yeah, so the technology is only a very small part of the whole digitalization. The human side of things, which is getting people to buy in and if it doesn't work, fail fast and give recognition, all of that change management, that's actually where the more of the complexity is. Yeah.
Winning the hearts and minds of the people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what role then does data play in that, and the whole data capture side of things, being able to show the evidence, I suppose, at the end of the day? You were talking before about increases in metres drilled, or a percentage improvement. Does everyone share in that success? Is that where your wins come from?
I think it's more, it provides a robust way to understand how your operation is performing. I think that there's a lot of business practices, particularly in the mining industry, that are underpinned by, and it's not necessarily incorrect, it's just empirical tools or experience that isn't really robustly codified or understood. And I think that data is a way to ensure that we capture that experience and that we're not there yet again, but we capture that experience, and in a robust way we can say, this is how the operation is performing now, and these are the things that we're going to implement, and then measure the change. I think we do that on a specific project by project basis, but I think that by and large we can do that for almost any change and really use strong inference in order to understand, as we make decisions, even in a complex and uncertain mining environment, how are we actually affecting the value of our operation. And I think that's where it's really going to grow and provide large value gains for the mining industry.
Okay. And you mentioned before about data and people then becoming data analysts rather than using the data itself.
Yeah, so I think the learning has been in the past is that there is an awful lot of data, and getting into the data can be interesting and exciting, but very much to Mathew's point, you have to be focusing not so much on that data world, but more around what are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and being able to demonstrate that there's some outcomes that are being achieved. The data is, at that discrete level, is a means to the end. So you have to get to the end. And sometimes what we've seen in the past is that you get caught up in that analytics side. I don't think that's as prevalent as it was, initially when there was so much data out there that was available.
Okay.
Richard?
Yeah, no, I think it's the data is just the Lego blocks.
Yeah.
It's the information, it's the analysis that comes from that, and where we're going to is actually automating a lot of that analysis so that people actually aren't buried in the data.
Exactly.
They're actually getting higher level information so they can actually start making decisions. We need to keep the data. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, there's so much data out there, we don't capture it all, we're not using it. But I think at the stage that mining is at the moment on its data analysis journey, we need to be careful we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think there will be information within that data that we haven't analysed yet that has value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we need to just, have an option.
That's it.
If you like.
You build $1 billion asset, and often you make shortcuts on storage of data or the data capture. And if you've spent $1 billion to create a mine, or it doesn't really matter what the number is, the cost of storage of that information once you've created that asset is so minuscule.
And it creates an option for you.
Yeah, and you often hear that we've got so much data, we don't know what to do with it, but often it's more we just don't have the people with the skills in order to look through that data. And even though I think the industry is facing a short-term and medium-term skills gap, and we've talked about how many mining students there are in Australia, I think it's also a great opportunity to get people outside of the industry involved in mining that don't have a mining engineering degree, because it's those fresh perspectives that you can give them domain knowledge in mining, you can give them mining skill sets, but they're already coming with their own knowledge, and that will be invaluable to the mining industry, and it's an exciting future.
So you've all had some level of success, obviously, with the implementation of a digital strategy. What knock-on effects or roll-on effects are there once you get those initial successes and start moving then further and further down the line of integration of more and more digitalisation of a strategy?
I think, as we touched on before, I think it's the initial. There's always a larger hurdle to start, and then once you've already had a success, it becomes easier to bring everybody along the journey with you. And I think, as we discussed, it becomes part of the business practice. I'm incredibly lucky to work in an awesome team where, when there's an operational problem, we have access to very, very high frequency information that's near real time. And so whenever we approach a problem, it's always data first, in order to understand what the current state of the operation is. And then we also have people on our team with machine learning, a basic understanding of machine learning in their toolbox, in order to start looking at, okay, how can we use this information in order to either predict or better understand where we are, and as we make changes operationally, what effect those changes have, and how we can attribute value to those changes. And I think that's key, is just working out, even though it's such a complex mining environment, we still need to have some way of, in that complex environment, attributing value to certain actions, to certain changes that you make in that environment. But yeah, I think it just falls into the way that you operate the business, which is awesome to see.
Okay.
So I think a huge impact of digitalization is on company culture. So company culture is defined as habit, and 60% of everything that we do is based on habit. And one of the big habits that we have, or that people generally have, is that when there's a problem, we go and we look at this data set. We may have a bias towards that, because in the past we've always found the solution in this data set. Now, digitalization allows a couple of things. First of all, as Mathew was saying, you start looking at data first, as opposed to your bias around where the issue is. So that's one thing. And most organizations are biased towards action, so they will say, well, I'm going to take action and then I'm going to use the data to make sure that the action was the right action. So by digitalization, by moving the speed of information and allowing everybody to have it, it starts to influence the company culture. So you start to say, well, first of all, the answer doesn't have to come at the top. If you're having problems down here and digital information allows you to see that's happening, then you're almost expecting the operator to take action and not have to wait for the supervisor. So your speed of change and speed of action starts to collapse. The other thing that you see in companies with as they start to shift that culture is that, so the right answer is not necessarily coming from the top and everybody waiting for somebody to tell them what it is so that they can align. Generally what's happening is that the answers are coming out of the data, and it's coming much more from lower in the organization. So I think that digitalization really has that impact on companies.
I was just going to say it's a snowball effect. Once you start doing something, you then see more opportunities, more ways of using it. I mean, we were talking before about, we're getting a lack of skills and not many people trained out. Maybe part of the solution actually lies in the AI augmented reality. Instead of actually spending 6 months training someone, you spend 1 month training them. They then have augmented reality, and that actually gives them a lot more information in real time when they're on the job about what they need to do. And so we can use the technology to compensate for some of the other deficiencies that we're seeing.
I agree. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that the technology side of things is no longer an advantage. It's no longer a nice to have. It's a
must-have.
It's a must-have, exactly. What are some of the things you can do to break down the barriers and make it easier to put that technology in and create this more connected mining operation?
Some of it is happening. It's generational, right? I mean, the mining industry is playing catch-up. Most people, you buy stuff on Amazon. You want to see where it is, you look it up and they can tell you. Whereas the supply industry and the mining doesn't have that same level of visibility. I think the barriers have been broken down, but they're being broken down outside the mining industry, and the people inside are looking out and going, I want that. I don't see breaking down the barriers as big a problem. I think there's so much momentum in the rest of society, we're going to have to move, otherwise we'll be left behind.
Yeah, they were talking this morning about being an early adapter. So there is an awful lot of good models out in the world that you can look at, and you can say, oh, why can't we do that here? So I think it is, certainly one of the things, in order to be effective digitally, you have to have the infrastructure in place. I mean, that's a given. And the cost of infrastructure and the cost of technology is declining rapidly.
You can outsource a lot of it these days.
Yeah,
anyway.
so it's no longer a barrier. So the biggest barrier is, how are we going to apply this technology? And being, forcing, or not forcing, I say, allowing people to adapt and come together, creating that sort of permission to experiment. That's going to be a big thing in order to be successful.
Yeah, I think the greatest roadblock is probably culture and a people-related roadblock, right? I think we're saying that we need to adopt these processes or be left behind, but we're already behind, right? And in order to catch up, I mean, the rest of the industry is going to move at a pace that won't slow down. And we're lucky that we get to jump in when there's already a lot of learnings in place in other industries. But we're already being left behind. And I think that the mining industry is risk adverse. We're potentially that way because safety is so critical. We don't like to take risks. But we maybe confuse risk-taking for how we operate our business and how we undertake business to safety critical decisions. And we probably need to divorce the two a little bit. You can't do it totally, but there's a lot of value associated with digitalization and automation, and that's demonstrated. But there's still some hesitance but that's not how we've operated our other operations, or that's not how we've done business before. Why do we need that in our operation? And naturally, we're going to have to adopt these technologies when we're operating in low-grade environments, in deeper mines, but we're waiting for that to push us into that space as opposed to rolling it out across our operation.
We need to start also thinking about the risk of not moving.
Yeah.
Or moving slowly.
And what is the value loss?
What's the time value of money? What are the opportunity loss that we have had through not acting?
Yeah, certainly, if you're an early adopter, you're going to be out in front of the group because you're going to have you're going to have the type of culture and organization that you're looking for. Some organizations are focused around control, and other organizations are creating understanding in order to get people to discipline themselves. If you're an early adapter, you're on that side of things. If you're on the control side, you're waiting for somebody to tell you.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes left, so before we open up questions to the floor, I'd just like to finish with one last one up here. What advice do you have for anyone looking to start their digital journey or about to go down that path?
John, Mathew?
Well,
we're going left to right again.
Embrace it and go for it. I think that the value gains aren't just the initial. You'll have a reason for doing digitalization or automation, but it's the value add that you don't see. I mean, an example is just having all that information available, and there's an operational problem. In the process of just evaluating what's happening with this problem, you learn so much more about your operation with the data that's available that you solve a problem that gives you a 10% gain, but then you also find out we can also make all of these other changes that give you another 10% plus another 10%. And I think it's that additional value that isn't well captured in conferences or presented, but definitely happens at an operational level, which is exciting.
So my advice, based on the number of companies that we've been working with, both in natural resources and outside in manufacturing and in the financial services space, is that you have to approach digitalization both on a technology side and on what we would call a human engineering side. So you have to look at the change management side and getting people aligned and together as much as you're looking at that technology. And be prepared for the positive effect of unintended consequences. So one of the unintended consequences that you have around moving into digital space is that decisions can be made much more quickly, errors in decision-making can be identified and rectified, and that all of a sudden people are changing the level of work that they're working at. So now you're not asking a superintendent to focus, in a natural resources space so much on the weekly and the monthly. Now he's focusing more on the monthly and the quarterly, and the supervisor is focusing more on while he's not so much in that moment, he's more focused on the day and the handover to the next shift and things like that. So everybody's starting pushing decisions down into that operator space, which is good. It means that you have to educate that operator a lot more, and then you have to, spend more time around, creating understanding of what are appropriate and inappropriate. So the investment has to be on both the technology and on getting the company ready for change.
I look, just simplifying that, you need to do it yesterday. If you don't have a digital strategy, or you don't have digitalisation as part of your strategy, I think is probably a better way of putting it, a part of your business, you will not be in business in a few years' time.
Get started.
You need to get started.
So where would you naturally start?
I think that will vary with business to business, but most of the mining operations, I think the obvious place is to start around your operations and your safety. And the two go hand in hand. If you can actually digitalise and bring the autonomy into your operations, you will take people out of the danger zone.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a lot of people are starting out that on the mine planning from the block model into day-to-day operations, and then that naturally expands from, you know, mine to mill, and then pretty soon you're pit to port. So that's sort of like the build-up that we see. And the other thing that we've seen is a lot of things are starting to come from the maintenance side, where they're starting to look at both the maintenance and also the supply chain.
Well, then you need to start thinking also about the interoperability, making sure everything can talk to each other.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got two different languages and you have to have a translator, that just slows things down.
Well, and the machines talking to each other as well, yeah.
Yeah, so you start to actually have the machines talking directly to each other and making that interoperability a key part of, it's the whole ecosystem.
There was a presentation just a couple of minutes ago on the language the machines need to be able to understand, and I can't remember the
And I think one of the things when looking at a digital strategy, it's perhaps not always, a detailed plan is always good, but I think it's more the founding principles in which you're going to employ your digital strategy.
Digital
like
culture?
Modularization of how you interact with data, machines, open data formats, and those sorts of things, which no matter what happens in the way that technology evolves, you expose your business in a way that it's easy to transfer and plug and play, but in a modular way, be able to upgrade certain sections of how you do business and how you assess business performance, so that you can continue to expose the business to that exponential improvement that is not slowing down.
Yeah.
Some people may argue, but
Excellent. All sage advice. Well, I hope that's generated some questions for everyone out here in the audience. We do have a few minutes left if anyone has a question or two. You, sir?
So hi, Alex Bertram from BHP. We've had a lot of conversation today around capability and ability to attract and retain even mining engineers into mining. As we look at digital strategy work, there's an inherent need to have deep digital capability, development, software side, huge competition for that capability from arguably much more attractive sectors. So interested in the panel's view about how attraction and retention of digital natives, digital talent plays into digital strategy and what we can do about it as an industry.
I'm going to put a slightly different twist on that and say that digital talent or the digital skills needs to become part of what mining engineers, process engineers, geologists, geophysicists, everyone has to do. It's becoming a skill needed for modern society. It's sort of like learning how to read and write. You now need to learn how to do data analysis and some coding. And so I think we need to expand beyond just saying, how do we attract the data scientists into our industry, but how do we actually make sure that the graduates coming into our industry have those skills no matter where they come from?
yeah, and I think that's a resource problem or issue that everyone is facing. And I think everybody recognises that there's a demand for people with coding and machine learning ability, and people are rapidly trying to provide ways in order to minimise the barriers to education in order to provide that for anybody that wants to learn. And as you say, I think it'll just be another tool in the toolbox. And if anything, how we retain people in the mining industry and how we attract people to the mining industry is probably the same as everybody else, and it's almost an economic problem. But being able to have communications to mine sites and underground, potentially we're looking at instead of asking someone to come to a mine site in order to do some data analysis, they can be anywhere in the world and be providing that advice. I think that the business model will change so that we're not as reliant on people flying in or a remote location or something like that. Yeah.
So Alex, I would say that BHP is probably, as a first step, well positioned, but you would want to outsource the majority of the development side of things. The actual learning, the use of the interfaces can be quite intuitive. It's just like you and your smartphone, you know, or your kids and their smartphone. So the amount of, it's almost like you're not really changing the thinking. You're just saying to the engineer, well, if you want to see, you know, why did the engine fail, and you know, why did it fail this time as opposed, and give me a data set of the last 20 times, and you know, what were some of the telltales? You know, you can do that much faster now. So you're not digging through Excel spreadsheets and pivot tables and things like that. You could just sort of, it's not as simple as asking Siri, but it's going to get that simple. So a lot of that, the making the digitalization work, that interface, is probably going to be outsourced. It's not going to be inside BHP. And the BHP engineers and the mining engineers are going to really be saying, well, that's great, and what I want to do is this. And they're going to constantly be pushing. That's what we've been seeing in the other spaces. Actually, BHSF is a great example. You know, the users are pushing the digitalization, and they're saying, I want this functionality. I want to be able to see these things.
Look, unfortunately, we're out of time now, so if everyone could please join me in thanking Mathew, John, and Richard.
Well done, guys.
Thank you.
Well done.